So good morning, everyone. I'm Gina Sudam. I'm the president of the Wyoming County Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to welcome you to our Restart, Rebound, Rebuild series. This morning, we are talking about nonprofit organizations and how to rebound your nonprofit after the COVID-19 pandemic. I have joining me this morning Heather Turok. Heather and I have known each other for several years. I worked with her at the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and then when she worked with Keystone College. So she's had lots of fundraising experience, and she's going to share that with us today. A little bit about my background in fundraising for those of you who don't know. I have worked for about 10 years in nonprofit fundraising before coming to the Wyoming County Chamber, and it'll be 7 years with the Wyoming County Chamber this July. So thank you again all for joining us, and Heather and I are very excited about our morning's discussion. I am going to stop sharing my screen now that you've kind of seen Heather's name. You can look her up on LinkedIn and connect with her there. I think she's also shared her contact information in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I'll ask that you all keep your phones muted during the call. That just helps to eliminate the background noise, but you can use the chat feature down at the bottom of your screen. And if you would like to shut off your camera, you could also do that at the bottom of your screen by clicking stop video. But we love to see your faces, so you could leave those on if you'd like as well. We have, again, with us this morning, Heather. Heather, if you would unmute yourself so we can have a little conversation about nonprofits. So Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Well, as Gina mentioned, I served as the executive director of the Muscular Dystrophy Association in Northeastern Pennsylvania, and I also served as the vice president for institutional advancement at Keystone College. And for about the past 18 months, 2 years, I have gone out on my own, and I have been doing nonprofit fundraising consulting for a variety of organizations of different sizes and some colleges and some different healthcare nonprofits. And I can tell you that this is definitely the most interesting time in my career, as I imagine that it is for most of you as well.
It definitely has been interesting for both nonprofits and businesses, and pretty much any organization or person out there. Heather and I were just sharing our homeschooling stories about our children. So yes, it's definitely an interesting time for all. So Heather, to kind of kick off today, let's just start with the big elephant, right? The question about events. Do we postpone? Do we cancel? Do we reinvent? What do our fundraisers and events look like, and what things should we consider?
Well, I think that's a big question that everybody's asking, and it's been very difficult to figure it out as we've been going along because it's been a rapidly evolving and changing situation. Nonprofits can be in different counties, different states with different guidelines that are being dictated by local government mandates on what they can and cannot do. So we have that right off the bat is what can you legally do and not do. And then besides that, you have what you should do and should not do. Obviously, if you choose to hold an event, you may deal with some controversy. There's going to be people that favor it, people that don't favor the idea of having an event right now. There's an issue of liability that's still floating around, whether you can be liable if someone ends up actually getting sick. There are staffing issues. There's still problems with people being able to come to work, some because they don't have childcare, some because they might be afraid of getting sick. So it's really challenging to figure out, should I hold this event or should I not? One of the things that I'm advising folks is to take a look at what you're actually getting out of that event in terms of the bottom line revenue, and if there's another way that you can alternately make it up. One of the things you and I and Gina have discussed as a possibility is reaching out to those sponsors who intended to sponsor your event and talking to them about the mission and the need for your nonprofit right now to still really capture that revenue without holding the event. And it's true that there might be somewhat of a loss in terms of some of the things that you just can't make up, which is the general public, if they were there, putting money in your basket raffle, but to at least capture as much of it as you can.
I think that's definitely a good idea, Heather. I want to talk a little bit, and I think this is the place to do it, is the new green standards, right? So when we go in Pennsylvania to phase green, those new standards say that we can hold events up to 250 people. But as you and I talked about, people may not be comfortable with that. And you don't want to put your event revenue at risk by putting an event out there of that size and hoping to capture an audience of that size. And then, as you and I both know, whether you're hosting an event for 250 or 50, a lot of the expenses are still the same. So I think that we need to be careful of that. What other advice do you have in that kind of perspective of the new, 250 max number when we go to the green phase?
Well, I think you're definitely right. And, everybody wants an answer for that, but we don't have good statistical data. I mean, every area is unique, every nonprofit is unique, and we don't know how people are going to turn out for these things. And like you said, a lot of these costs are pretty much fixed, and they're actually made more difficult now because of the restrictions that we have. We might have thrown out a big buffet before, and that's not going to be something that people are going to want to do. You're talking about having things individually served. Really, you need a lot of low touch things where you're not having interaction. Those are most of the guidelines that are out there. And most of the events that people have are just not designed for that type of minimized or distance interaction. So in order to do that, it may cost you a lot more to have that and not know how many people you're going to have even show up for it. So
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And maybe just surveying, right? Some of those people that would normally come to say, do you have corporate policies around attending events or not? Because that's what I'm hearing from some of our businesses is there are corporate policies around, I'm not going to be able to attend events over 100 people for the next several months or through the end of the year.
that's a
So
great point.
yeah, I'd say survey some of those people and see what's available. So now let's talk about, with people spending more time online, how can nonprofits take advantage of that?
Well, one of the things that's still important to do is engage your client base virtually. So, and even if that wasn't something that you normally did, maybe before your Facebook wasn't that active and you posted on it once a week, now is the time to stay relevant. So you need to keep sharing your mission. You need to keep showing the work that you're doing, the need for what you're doing, and keep putting it out there. Because one thing that's good is we have a captured audience. More people are spending time online, more people are home. So that virtual engagement piece is going to be very important. I have seen a lot of organizations doing really creative things. So I have a museum that normally you go in and it's very interactive. Obviously that they can't be open right now. And they're doing virtual tours of museum. So you can kind of still go in and virtually interact. They're doing games that are related to exhibits that they have at the museum. Those are the types of things that you want to be sharing, fun things, even if it's tips, even if it's games, if you don't have the time to create the original content, just so you stay on the forefront of people's minds, because this is a time that you don't want to slip to the background.
Right. And a lot of those virtual tours were free of charge, but how would you advise maybe nonprofits who don't have an online fundraising platform to kind of move forward in this time? I've seen some GoFundMe pages, but is that, something you would recommend, or what is your take on those things?
I am not a big fan of GoFundMe for most large professional organizations. I think they kind of conjure up a different kind of image. And I think that they can be effective sometimes for smaller organizations and for very specific purposes. One of the examples I was discussing was, let's say you have an agency that works with animals, and you have a specific animal that came in and was hit by a car, and you want to fundraise for a $2,000 vet bill. that might be an interesting way to utilize GoFundMe. Most larger organizations have some type of online platform already, which they can get virtual donations and that you can build upon. If you don't have it, you can actually do something through PayPal and then just build an overlay on your website. So there's still lots of options to get donations in, but I'm not a huge fan of the GoFundMe for the large organizations.
Great. And there's certainly, we have members who can help you if you are an organization and you're thinking about, I don't have a way to give on my website. Contact myself, Allison, or Deb, and we can talk you through who those members might be that can help you to adjust your website and talk about some online fundraising platforms. What do you advise organizations who might have been considering a capital campaign or a large investment in 2020?
Yeah, we've had a lot of people in that boat for this year, and it's very difficult because for those of you that have planned a big campaign, it's a multi-year process in which you probably engaged a consultant, whether it was me or someone more expensive, and took a look at a lot of things and spent a lot of time and investment in this process. And truthfully, that data is really no good anymore. I would say my advisement is suspending all of those big capital investments right now and reevaluate it in 6 months and see where we're at. There's a lot of predictions of what might happen in the fall, but there's no real solid data. And discretionary spending is changing, budgets are changing. There's a lot of things that are just completely different now. So I would not advise making it an investment in, let's say, a building right now when we're not even in physical structures. I just don't think that would be wise.
And I certainly agree with that. Let's talk about, so we've kind of talked about some don't do things right now. Let's talk about some ideas about diversifying revenue, and what advice can you give our nonprofits about that?
So one of the biggest things that I work with clients on is diversifying their revenue prior to the COVID situation. And this is a very difficult thing for a lot of nonprofits because they tend to have one kind of flagship event that holds their budget for the whole year. They're the ones that are really in trouble right now because if it's a big gala, any type of large event, and they were not able to hold it this year, and even potentially next year, it's having a major impact on their bottom line. And so that's why I was always stressing prior to this that we need to diversify our sources of revenue and not rely on that particular event. Because even though it's been successful for many years, the truth is all events, they kind of fizzle out in time. They have a shelf life. And after a while, you're going to have to reinvent that event anyway. So I think right now, if you haven't taken the time to really look at other ways you can fundraise, to go ahead and do that. And it can be, of course, we don't want to spend a ton of time on a bunch of smaller events, but we want to look at that diversification of revenue. So if you weren't doing online fundraising, now is the time to add that, and a great time actually to add online fundraising, smaller events, different virtual engagement. So I would say now is the time to go connect with your board and look at a plan again.
I think that's a great idea. And one of the things that we did as a chamber, and I'm so grateful that we did, is we moved to what we call in the chamber industry kind of a tiered membership model, where we talk to some of our larger investors and get those dollars kind of upfront through their membership. We were spending a lot of time as, again, chamber is also a nonprofit. So we were spending a lot of time on events. And when I started, I thought, are we an event organization or are we a membership services organization? And in order to focus on our true mission of serving our members, we needed to shift where that revenue came from, but also where our attention was given. So through this tiered membership structure, we were able to do that. So there are a lot of different models out there for organizations and how they can shift and diversify their income. And I'm sure Heather would be more than happy to talk to you offline individually and figure out what could work for your organization. let's talk about summer camps, right? So you and I both have some children, as we talked about earlier, and one of the things that my kids keep asking is, is this summer camp going to happen? Can I go to that summer camp? My daughter, who's attended a summer camp for the last, I think, 6 years, this would have been her last year. She ages out next year, and she's super disappointed that that summer camp had canceled. So are there some alternatives to that? And what are you hearing in the realm of summer camp, and especially for those organizations who really rely on that revenue?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been tough. We've had a lot of summer camps that have made the decision to cancel. One of the reasons is just that, it's kind of still evolving. But the ones that have chosen not to cancel have been very inventive in doing a virtual summer camp, and we're seeing lots of those be successful. And even something that you think that might have not been virtual can be made virtual through online engagement. And right now, we're just using Zoom. This is a free service that anybody can use. And so take the people that you normally were having work at the summer camp, and now you only need one or two of the people versus maybe a staff of 15 or 20 that was supervising all these children to help work with it and be the person that's live and doing live engagement.
Right, and I've seen some fun, summer camp in a box activities and some other things come out. So I think don't be afraid to engage, even if your focus isn't children. Don't be afraid to engage your audience in a virtual way. We've seen some interesting. Instead of giving, everybody gets a gift bag when they come into your event, right? We've seen some interesting. Let's package a box and send some more meaningful gifts to those that might participate in a virtual event, and then have them open those gifts as you go through your event. So that's kind of a fun way to, again, get that audience engagement, that you're not just listening or putting something on in the background, that you're really engaging in that event. How about, where am I at? So one of my pieces, and you and I talked a lot about this, is budgets right now, right? So we all do, as nonprofits, we all do a big annual budget, and then most of us kind of break that down into this event needs to have this much net income and so on. What are you advising your clients about their annual budgets and their smaller event budgets, and how to look at those pieces right now?
I think this is one of the most interesting pieces, even pre-COVID, that nonprofits tend to not analyze their budgets as a business would. And we really need to be looking at that return on investment, that ROI. As you said, Gina, there's a cost to having events and different things, and you have to take those administrative costs into account. So if you have an event that does $100,000, but at the end of the day, you're only netting 50,000, you're only making 50,000 on that. And this is an important time to look at that when you're making those decisions, as we discussed earlier, about potentially cutting or changing an event. Well, really, you only have the 50,000 to make up because you're not putting out, 50,000 in expenses. So it's really important to look at it from a business perspective and analyze that revenue, and to also look at your services as well. This is a time to take a look at that. And every nonprofit is in a different boat right now. Some are not actually having a lot of people utilize their services because they can't right now, because they were sort of a direct engagement. Others are stressed to the max, food banks, different frontline services like that. They're putting out more than ever, and they don't have the money coming in. So it really depends on what boat you're in there.
And I think, again, one of the things that I did very early on, and if you haven't done this as a nonprofit, I would strongly suggest, is to do a new budget, right? So your old budget is probably completely thrown out the window. You have, I know for us as a chamber, we had what we thought were fixed costs for this year, expenses that because we're not doing our programs, right, those expenses don't exist. Or because we haven't been in our office since March, we were able to turn down our heat, and those expenses are less. So really look at what your expenses are and do a new forecasted budget for your board of directors, and make sure they understand the difference in where you thought you would be as of June 30th and where you're really going to be as of June 30th. And then do that again for the next 3 months. Where are you going to be on September 30th? And what changes can you make to the expenses and the revenue to really tighten up and still keep a net income, hopefully, through through the end of the year. But also don't be afraid to paint the hard truth, right, for your board of directors. So I think that, you and I both spending a lot of time in the nonprofit world. Sometimes it can be easy for an executive director, easier for an executive director, to paint a rosy picture for their board, because they're maybe afraid of some of the repercussions that come from um, the cold hard truth, right? So what kind of things are you should they be evaluating right now if their budgets might be tough? If you look at, it used to be called kind of a SWOT analysis, but I like to refer them as a SOAR analysis. So kind of strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results, right? Instead of those weaknesses. But what really should our nonprofits be looking at in that realm?
Well, I think, just to kind of speak a little more to what you're talking about with the board transparency, I think that's important. And I think nonprofits are very afraid to partner with other nonprofits for some reason. They say like they're going to steal their revenue, they're going to steal all of their people that they have, their donors. So, some of the people that are really successful right now are partnering with other nonprofits and partnering with businesses. We see restaurants partnering with little leagues, and you purchase X and a portion is going to go to support the little league next year that obviously isn't getting any revenue this year. And we are in a small area, and there are so many organizations that do have similar or complementary missions that can work together right now during this time to get the maximum dollar for both of their organizations. So that's the one thing that I think that we should be thinking about too, is partnerships.
And that's a great point, Heather. I think that there are a lot of nonprofits who could really benefit from those great partnerships. When we talked about doing those SWOT analysis, you and I talked about sometimes we have staff or operations, right, in our organizations that especially operations, they're there because, well, we've always done it this way, right? So let's talk about that for a little bit and what we should be looking at.
I think that's one of the biggest things I see is, we get really used to having our certain events or having things done a certain way. And that's why it benefits having a consultant or any outside person kind of look at your organization, because you just become familiar with it and you lose sight of things. And I think that now is definitely a time to take a look at things from a more of an outside or different perspective and, ask yourself, are these things supporting the mission? Are they supporting the bottom line of what I need? And truthfully, most positions and things in time change and evolve in different ways that need to be readjusted and reevaluated. I know that there's some nonprofits making hard decisions about staffing right now. And, we never want to see, of course, people be laid off, but it is something to look at as how is the staff complement helping and supporting your mission at this time. But there is some good news about that. Can I roll into kind of talking about
Sure.
volunteers?
Mhm.
It's while I unfortunately some are having to lose staff, right now is a great time to get volunteers. So even if your organization was not utilizing volunteers much in the past, now is a great time to do it. And I think oftentimes we think of the volunteer like somebody standing there and taking the tickets at the front. But there is high-level professionals sitting at their house right now needing something to do and wanting to do something, wanting to be engaged in an organization and use their skills, their clerical skills for phone calls, for outreach, ask them to help you find sponsors. They're ready and willing to help. And the other great thing about that is you may have just found yourself new volunteers and new board members when we're kind of getting back into the post-COVID world that can stay and be a part of your organization. So I really think that this is a great time to build your volunteer base.
And I want to touch on one thing about staffing too. So many organizations are needing to make some hard decisions about staffing and kind of run that SWOT analysis on maybe each of their staff positions. And I think one thing that can be looked at right now is a shared staffing situation, right? So what are the expertise of each of your staff members on your team, each of your board members, and what can they do for your organization that maybe they haven't been doing in the past, right? So how can you help to cultivate them during this time? They may have ideas about how their position can change or what additional value they can provide to your organization. But then also talk to other organizations who may be looking at, I can't afford to have this person on my staff full time right now. And maybe there's another organization out there that is busier than they've ever been. So maybe they would be willing to take a few hours of that person's time and pay them for that. So that, again, you're not, because I know running small organizations and always working for small organizations, your staff become like your family. I mean, Heather and I have stayed in touch for been at least 8 years, right, since we worked together. But we've stayed in touch because those small relationships become so personal. So you want to make sure that your staff are taken care of. So maybe some shared work ideas might be something. And again, with our small community, people know other organizations and what they're good at and what they're known for. So consider that as something that can be done when you're thinking about your staff. Heather, as we move into allowing this to open up for questions, do you have any other final thoughts or advice, things that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
I think there's a lot of resources out there. The Chamber obviously is a great organization and resource for the businesses and nonprofits as they continue to move forward. We have entities like the Association of Fundraising Professionals, local. It's not that expensive to be in. And even if you don't want to join, you can go to most of the webinars and things for a small fee as a non-member. I suggest checking those out. Nonprofit Pro, just some of the websites and webinars. There's a plethora of things out there, a lot of things to read. Everybody's in different situations too. There's resources for grants. There might be insurance resources, all different things to take a look at depending on what your organization needs. So I encourage you to reach out and look at those resources.
Very good, Heather. I appreciate that. I'm going to open this up for questions, and you could either type them into the chat if you'd like to do that, or because we have a relatively small group today, we have about 30 of us on the call. I think it's okay that we kind of unmute ourselves and ask questions if you have them. We'll give this a couple minutes for questions. I'd like to talk too while we're getting ready for some questions. I'd like to just mention the nonprofits who have been able to pivot or to provide some services in areas that are much needed in our community. And certainly I think that Deb, and I see her unmuting herself, but Deb Shirtliff, I was going to talk about your Fed program. So Deb created seeing a need in our community for people being, kind of under the stay-at-home order, created a transportation program to bring people food directly to their community. And now that that stay-at-home order is slowly being lifted and we're moving into the green, that need is evolving and changing. So Deb, do you want to talk quickly about your survey, and then I'll let you ask your question?
Absolutely. Thanks, Gina. I think the key part of what has worked is, as Heather mentioned, the collaboration with nonprofits that already existed. So we work with a childhood hunger outreach partners. We work with Seven Loaves Soup Kitchen, and we've worked with the CEO Weinberg Food Bank and coordinated baby supplies through Hands as well. So the idea that the food existed, the people were at home, we just made that connection. And that's basically the program in a nutshell. Now at this point, as travel is lifted, coming, we're figuring out what that looks like. And Gina helped develop a survey so we could move forward knowing what the need still was, and will be, I think, in the future, through the fall, through the winter, COVID-based, economically based, all of those concerns.
Yeah, and I think it's important for nonprofits to not be afraid to do that, right? So again, we talked about surveys for your events, but surveys about, this is normally the need that our nonprofit fulfills for our clients, if you will. What needs can we fulfill right now, right? Or what changing needs do you have? And that was a great survey that you put out there to do that. And I think that it kind of embodies what we're encouraging our nonprofits to do right now, is don't be afraid to ask your clients what they need and to be able to pivot your services to meet those needs.
And
So,
we've been sharing that data, right? So I share that data with Seven Loaves. So we've been delivering 520 meals a week, and normally their pickup every day is maybe 50. So where is the need greatest? What are the demographics of who needs that food? So sharing that data again and being in collaboration helps everyone know how to move forward.
Very good. Deb, did you have a question for Heather? I kind of put you on the spot to talk about
No,
your program.
it's okay. I did have a question. In the green with the gathering, I know the number, as you mentioned, jumped up to 250. Mm-hmm. Is that still look like masked and 6 feet apart and all of the social distancing in your understanding of green?
Yes. Okay. And Heather, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but in my understanding, 250 still means social distancing. Masks recommended, I think, kind of depending on how long, right, we're in the green for, and no one can really give us an answer yet on how long we sit in the green before, as I heard it called, we go to the next new normal, right? So no one can kind of give us an answer on that, but for right now, yes, I think green phase still means social distancing. It still means masks. So even though we can gather up to 250 people, it still looks really different, right? Mm-hmm. It's still not the same events we are used to. And I think there's a lot of precautions that we still need to take. Heather, do you have any?
No, I think you might be more up to date with me because it's been constantly changing, but I know that they were still recommending, and they're basing this off the CDC guidelines, which are evolving as well, but they were still recommending low touch things for food, no buffets. So still single service or individual meals. They could actually be served, the server has to wear a mask. So it's definitely going to be different. You're not going to be able to have the kind of food out that we did at events, and to often keep the prices down.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I thought I saw someone else unmute themselves and get ready to ask.
Mark Chamberlain.
Hi, Mark.
Heather, I wish you could see my smiling face. Great job. I have a page and a half of notes. Congratulations. And something that jumped out at me when you were talking about Facebook and utilizing that as a platform and capturing the audience. Gina and I are talking offline about Zoom, Zapier, and Eventbrite as a potential fundraising source for nonprofits. And you can have, as you probably know, up to 10,000 people in a virtual room. Is that something that you've looked at?
Well, I utilize Zoom a lot, and a lot of the nonprofits right now, I'm encouraging them to do it. It's kind of funny because before the pre-COVID, a lot of people were resistant to like using Zoom. They're like, it's just not as great. And now it's like, oh, we're using Zoom all the time. So it's great. Zoom I like because it's free. You can send someone the link and they can kind of hop right on. If you have Zoom Professional, you can run meetings as long as you can. If you don't, if you do the free version, it gives you this little warning after a certain period of time that they mostly let you extend. But it's great to hold virtual events, even just to keep people connected. Do not let your board meetings lapse. Do not let volunteer meetings that you were normally holding in person lapse. Hold them virtually. People want that engagement right now. So I definitely do that. I've used Eventbrite before. I mean, that's a different platform than Zoom. That is more related to typically events and kind of selling tickets on that, which you could utilize in some way, I suppose. But I have definitely seen a lot of people using Zoom. Some people like Skype. I think that's a little more difficult and cumbersome because you have to download a few different things. But absolutely, I think that the virtual engagement is the number one thing you need to be doing right now.
Well,
Thanks,
if
Heather.
you tie those three things together, Zoom, Eventbrite, and Zapier, you can monetize Zoom. You could charge admission to events like this. And again, Gina and I are talking offline about that. It's incredible.
Yeah, we've definitely been exploring that. Some nonprofits have done it and some haven't. Some have done them for free to just try to get the toe in the water of seeing if their base will kind of move over to that platform. And some have been charging for different virtual engagements. The camps are a good example of that. Some of the tours. Initially, a lot of things that came on were free, but I think that people are getting more used to the virtual platform and are willing to pay for it because they see it really is almost as good as being in person, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So too. Maureen, did you have a question for us?
I did. This question is for Heather. I wanted to know, do you by chance have a resource of creating passive income for nonprofits?
I could send you some things. What were you specifically looking for?
I'm just looking to see if, what's already in place, what we can build upon. Because as we say,
my kids fine, but men.
money
I told my group
that could, give us a passive income as opposed to one that we're constantly trying to recruit or cultivate.
Yeah, grants are kind of a way to do that. And I would love to tell you exactly what the grant landscape is going to look like after this. They are just unrolling different resources constantly for grants and nonprofits that have been impacted. Now, whether your particular organization will be able to utilize them depends on a lot of different factors. And I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now. Some of the experts are saying that there's going to be a lot of money available for nonprofits that are healthcare services based, that are, giving out food, things like that, and that we might see a dry up of money for organizations that were previously receiving a lot of money for STEM efforts and things like that. So I will definitely send you some things and we can kind of go through it, but it's rapidly evolving.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Heather. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I certainly appreciate it. I'll do one last call for questions if there's anything out there. I do want to give a quick shout out to the Dietrich Theater, who is certainly a loved nonprofit in our area. They have pivoted, and if you haven't seen this on their Facebook, they're doing takeout popcorn. I think it's every Friday. You can check out their Facebook page, but it's kind of a fun way for them to be earning some revenue right now. So I think that, again, just be creative, utilize what you have. Obviously, the Dietrich Theater has a great following on Facebook, so they were able to kind of get that out there and make a little bit of revenue during this time in selling those, popcorn and candies and some other things. So I wanted to kind of give that shout out as a nonprofit that I know would be certainly shut down and not having any other income right now, given the current situation. So good job to Erica and your staff for that. But thank you all. Thank you, Heather, so much for agreeing to be here today and for sharing your expertise with us. Heather has shared a link in the chat box, so I'll make sure that that gets shared when we share the recording of today's webinar. You can certainly share this recording and those resources out with your board of directors or your team as you would like to do that. We are looking at our next webinar will be this Wednesday, and that will be the personal services. So we're going to be talking about the green phase, what that means for personal services, what that means for our restaurants, what that means for our fitness, wellness centers, salons. So join us on Wednesday if you'd like to hear more about that. Thank you all so much for joining us on this Monday morning, and have a good day. Stay safe, you all. Bye now.